Chapter 8 Erroneous states unquestionably, while in rigorous observation of the myself, a complete logical differentiation between the exterior events of practical life and the interior states of the consciousness is always something unavoidable and non-excludable. We urgently need to know where we are located relative to the interior state of consciousness as well as to the specific nature of the exterior event that is happening to us in a given moment. Life in itself is a series of events that process themselves through time and space. Someone said, life is a chain of woes that humans carry entangled in their souls. Everyone is free to think as he wishes. I believe that disenchantment and bitterness always precede the ephemeral pleasures of a fleeting moment. Each event has its special characteristic flavor. The interior states also are of a distinct type. This is incontrovertible, irrefutable. Indeed, the interior work upon oneself emphatically refers to the diverse psychological states of the consciousness. No one can deny that in our interior we carry many errors and that erroneous states also exist. If indeed we want to change, we need with maximum and unavoidable urgency to radically modify those erroneous states of our consciousness. The absolute modification of the erroneous states originates complete transformations in the field of practical life. Obviously, when one seriously works on the erroneous states, then the unpleasant events of life can no longer hurt so easily. We are stating something that can only be comprehended by living it when indeed one experiences it precisely in the field of actions. Whosoever does not work on himself is always a victim of circumstances. He is like a miserable log on the boisterous waters of the ocean. Events incessantly change in their multiple combinations. They come one after another in waves. They are influences. Indeed, good and bad events exist. Some events will be better or worse than others. Certainly, to modify certain events, to alter results, to modify situations, etc., is possible amidst the number of possibilities. However, some factual situations, which truly cannot be altered, exist. These cases must be consciously accepted, even when some become dangerous and even painful. Unquestionably, such a grief disappears when we do not identify ourselves with the problem that has arisen. We must consider life as a successive series of interior states. The authentic history of our life in particular is formed by these states. When reviewing the totality of our own existence, we can then verify for ourselves in a direct manner that many unpleasant situations were possible thanks to wrong interior states. Although Alexander the Great was always tempered by nature, he gave in, due to pride, to the excesses which produced his death. Francis I died due to a dirty and abominable adultery, which is still well remembered in history. When Marat was assassinated by a perverse nun, he was dying of arrogance and envy. He believed himself to be absolutely just. Unquestionably, the ladies of the park death serfs totally exhausted the vitality of the horrible fornicator Louis XV. Due to jealousy, Othello became an assassin. Many are the people who die of ambition, anger or jealousy. This is well known by psychologists. When our will irrevocably fixes itself on an absurd tendency, we become candidates for the pantheon or cemetery. Therefore, jails are filled with sincerely mistaken people. Chapter 9 Personal Event 1 Dealing with the discovery of wrong psychological states. A complete intimate self-observation of the myself is unavoidable. Unquestionably, wrong internal states can be corrected with correct procedures. Since our internal life is the magnet which attracts external events, we need with a maximum and unavoidable urgency to eliminate erroneous psychological states from our psyche. The correction of mistaken psychological states is indispensable when one wants to fundamentally alter the nature of certain undesirable events. The alteration of our relation with certain events is possible if we eliminate certain absurd psychological states from our interior. Destructive external situations could become inoffensive and even constructive by intelligently correcting erroneous internal states. When one purifies oneself internally, one can then change the nature of unpleasant events that happen to us. Whosoever never corrects absurd psychological states, believing himself to be very strong, becomes a victim of circumstances. When one wishes to change the course of an unhappy existence, it is then vital to establish an order within one's disorderly internal house. People complain about everything. They suffer, cry, protest. They would like to change their life to come out of the misfortune they are having. Yet, unfortunately, they do not work upon themselves. People do not want to realize that their internal life attracts external circumstances. Therefore, if the external circumstances are painful, it is because of their absurd internal states. The external is merely the reflection of the internal. Therefore, whosoever changes internally originates in the order of things. The external events are never as important as the way one reacts when facing them. Did you remain serene before the offender? Did you gladly receive the unpleasant manifestations of your fellowman? How did you react to the infidelity of your beloved one? Did you let yourself be carried away by the poison of jealousy? Did you kill? Are you in prison, hospitals, cemeteries, or pantheons, and prisons are filled with sincerely mistaken ones who reacted in an absurd manner when faced with external events? The best weapon that a human being can use in life is a one can disarm beasts and unmask traitors by means of appropriate internal states. Wrong internal states convert us into defenseless victims of human perversity. You must learn to face the most unpleasant events of practical life with an appropriate internal uprightness. You must not become identified with any event. Remember that everything passes away. You must learn to look at life like a movie. Thus, you will receive the benefits. You must not forget that if you do not eliminate mistaken internal states from your psyche, then events of no value could bring you disgrace. Unquestionably, each external event needs its appropriate fare, that is, its precise psychological state, the correct psychological state. Chapter 10. The different is indeed, the rational mammal mistakenly called the human being does not possess a defined individuality. Unquestionably, this lack of psychological unity in the humanoid is the cause of so many difficulties and bitterness. The physical body is a complete unit and works as an organic whole unless it is ill. However, the internal life of the humanoid is in no way a psychological unit. The most critical aspect of all of this, in spite of what the diverse pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist schools might say, is the lack of psychological organization in the intimate depths of each person. Certainly in those conditions, an accordant work, as a complete harmonious unit in the internal life of people, does not exist. The humanoid, in regards to his internal state, is a psychological multiplicity. A sum of his learned ignoramuses of this tenebrous era pay homage to the I, they deify it. They place it on altars. They name it alter ego, superior I, divine I, etc. The know-it-alls of this dark age in which we live do not want to realize that the superior I or the inferior I are two sections of the same pluralized ego. Indeed, the humanoid does not have a permanent I, but instead he has a multitude of different infrahuman and absurd is. The wretched intellectual animal mistakenly called a human being is similar to a house in disorder where instead of one lord, many servants exist who always want to command and to perform their own whims. The greatest error of cheap pseudo-esotericism and pseudo-occultism is to assume that others possess or that one has a permanent and immutable I, without a beginning and an end. If for at least one instant those who think in the way previously described were to awaken consciousness, they would then clearly see for themselves that the rational humanoid is never the same one through a long period of time. Thus, from a psychological point of view, the intellectual mammal is continuously changing. To think that a person named Louis is always Louis is like a joke made in very bad taste. That subject called Louis has other egos in himself, who, in different moments, express themselves through his personality. Therefore, even if Louis does not like covetousness, another I within him, let's call him Peter, likes covetousness, and so on. No person is the same in a continuous manner. Indeed, one does not have to be a sage in order to fully realize the innumerable changes and contradictions of each individual. Therefore, to assume that someone possesses a permanent and immutable I is equivalent to committing an abuse against our fellowman and against oneself. Thus, many live inside each person. Any awakened or conscious person can, in a direct way, verify this by himself. Chapter 11. The beloved ego, since superior and inferior are two portions of the same thing, it is not irrelevant to state the following corollary. Superior I and inferior I are two aspects of the same tenebrous and pluralized ego. The so-called divine I or superior I, alter ego or anything of the sort, is certainly a trick of the myself, a form of self-deceit. When the I wants to continue here and in the beyond, it deceives itself with the false concept of being a divine and immortal I. None of us has a true I that is permanent, immutable, eternal, ineffable, etc. Indeed, none of us has a true and authentic unity of being. Unfortunately, we do not even possess a legitimate individuality. Although the ego continues beyond the sepulchre, it has, nonetheless, a beginning and an end. The ego, the I, is never something individual, unitary, a total unity. Obviously the I's in Oriental Tibet, the I's are called psychic aggregates, or simply, positive or negative values. If we think of each I as a different person, we can then emphatically state the following: many people exist within each person living in the world. Unquestionably, many different persons live inside each one of us. Some of them are better than others, and others are worse. Each one of these is each one of these persons struggles for supremacy as often as possible. Each one of these wants to be exclusive. Each one wants to control the intellectual brain or the emotional and motor centers until another substitutes it. The doctrine of the many was taught in Oriental Tibet by the true clairvoyants, by the true enlightened ones. Each of our defects is personified by one I or another. Since we have thousands and even millions of defects, it is obvious that many people lie within our interior. In psychological matters, we have been able to clearly verify that paranoid subjects, self-worshippers and mythomaniacs would never abandon the cult to their beloved ego for anything in the world. Unquestionably, such people mortally hate the doctrine of the many. Indeed, when one wants to know oneself, one must observe himself and try to know the differences which abound inside the persona one. If any one of our readers does not yet comprehend the doctrine of the many, it is due exclusively to the lack of practice in the field of self-observation. As one practices inner self-observation, one discovers for oneself many people, many who live inside our own personality. Those who deny the doctrine of the many as those who adore a divine I have undoubtedly never observed themselves seriously. Pointing at them, this time in a Socratic style, we state that those people not only ignore, but moreover, they ignore that they ignore. Certainly, we can never know ourselves without serious and profound self-observation. As long as any person continues considering himself as only one, it is clear that any internal change would be something more than impossible.